Rohit, welcome. You're one of the three co founders of Darwinbox. I had another guest recently on First Principles, Deepak Abbott of India Gold, who's also a co founder. He and Nitin Mishra are the two co founders. It's very interesting. I think these are the only two companies that I've had on First Principles, and we've done over 50 episodes with founders, where the founders have consciously chosen not to have a CEO, but they stay as co founders. What was the rationale? When did you decide it? When did you come to this decision between the three of you? And how has it endured?
Firstly, thank you, Rohin, for having me on the podcast. Gone through a few of them. I like how you go into some details, which are generally not as much spoken about. So excited about the
Which
next.
parts? Which parts did you like? What sort of topics would you like our conversation today to be more about?
No, I think the decision-making frameworks that
Great.
you spoke
One of my
about. I
favorites
think,
as well.
yeah,
All right.
I think that part I really liked in some of the conversations I listened to. I mean, you come back to one big decision for us as well. Uh, I think interestingly, we've never thought about that decision when we started, Rowan. So maybe I'll give you a little bit of background of how we
Yes,
came
please.
together, right? Jayant and I are childhood friends. He was in investment banking. I was in consulting, and both of us used to jam on ideas. And the reason to jam on ideas was very trivial, which was basically he was in Delhi, I was in Bombay, and we wanted to come back to Hyderabad, which happens to be where most of our family is from. I was born and brought up there. Jayant had most of his family there. And whenever we went there for vacation, we were like, we should figure ways to come back to Hyderabad. And we were throwing darts in the air in terms of what ideas we can do or we start a company, etc. And every idea used to have a little bit of problem solving and then it would fizzle out. Right? In a very similar context, something like this had come up. One part was, hey, we didn't enjoy what we were using. And then Jayant, in one of his transactions, realized that the data that was needed for HR was again missing for the transaction. He was a banker, so I mean, some wrong data which led to the deal falling through, etc. So
I
somewhere,
remember this in my research as well. I mean, the argument here being that if company A is acquiring company B, the due diligence usually works very well on the financial aspect of things. And how much money do you have? What assets do you have? But when you're doing due diligence on the people,
yeah,
the data is very suspect,
yeah,
right? How many people do you have? What kind of people are they? How many of them are likely to stick on, go, etc., and all that?
yeah. I mean,
This is the context
yeah,
you're in.
absolutely right. I can hazard a guess that probably 8 out of the 10 CEOs wouldn't know their attrition rates. And which also comes from a place of, hey, a place of comfort saying most of my people stay back. It's an assumption because people probably that you're working closely with who are in the leadership, etc., are staying back and a few are leaving. But across the organization, what's the attrition rate like, etc. And for in the pharma space, which Jayant was, this is a very big thing, right? How much of your top talent and top scientists are you able to retain, etc., is a big part, which during the transaction, whatever is quoted versus when the diligence happens, then what the numbers show is very different in that context. So, I mean, I'm making it to a very analytical level, but again, that goes on to saying who are your top talent, what do you do for them? Could be a bunch of things that you do, which HR system should capture, right? So that came from him. I was experiencing it more from my own experience of systems.
You were at McKinsey.
I was at McKinsey while this thing, and then I had experienced a bunch of really good tools while I was at Google, which were internally built. Then I saw this at customers or clients of McKinsey, where again, systems were not solving any data requests that we would put would take like a week to get that data back. Or whenever we would say, hey, why can't you institutionalize something like this? They would say, how would you do this, right? Like we have 10,000 employees or 20,000 employees. How do we do this? And something was missing, right? And one thing that caught our attention was HR system was that one system which is used by everybody in the organization. Right? If you take a CRM, it's used only by the sales teams. If you take a finance system, it's used only by the finance and accounting teams. HR system had that opportunity of actually touching the CEO to the last intern who's joined the organization. And we were very, very puzzled by why somebody had not solved that well. And it was also a category that existed. This is 2015, a category that existed for 2 decades by then. Right? And then came in Chaitanya. Chaitanya was a HR consultant. He was a colleague of Jayant at EY, and also a Telugu, right? Like, so interestingly, all our backgrounds, age.
Was he also motivated by moving back to Hyderabad?
Not really. Actually, I mean, he was a lot more into saying, hey, right, like I'm solving a problem at scale. Initially, I mean, he laughed at it, right? He's like, oh, again, another HR system, and people are trying to do one more thing, right? But again, I think the comfort he got after the problem solving we did together, and I'll come to where the difference existed. But I think three of us came together at a point of time in life, where we were not desperate about doing something. We were just excited about doing it. All of us from, similar backgrounds, all did engineering, then went on to do MBAs. All of us worked in between.
Roughly what, 10 years of experience? Like, around?
No, probably 6 to 7. So basically, all of us worked post engineering for 2-3 years, and then post MBA for 2-3 years. Like broadly, that was the spectrum, just about 30, 29, 30, all of us. So I think we came into it as equals. It was not a specific individual's idea, a specific motivation of somebody bringing somebody in, etc. So it was a very nice mix of individuals coming together who looked at each other as equals. We owned equal part of the company. So the question of CEO didn't come at all. It was basically saying, oh, we're 3 co-founders, we're doing different things in the organization, playing to our strengths. And there was no specific question on, who is CEO, etc. The question came up for the first time when an investor pitch happened, right? Like,
because I'm sure that's one of the things for an investor, that
every
who
round,
is the... Yeah.
Right? Every round. And I think the first time we went back to the blackboard and said, hey, do we need a CEO for this business? And then we asked ourselves, is that limiting us, right? Is not having a CEO limiting us? We actually didn't find situations like that. And
I must ask you, I get that the three of you felt that none of you needed to take the CEO role. How did you still then decide on a division of responsibilities?
So the division of responsibilities happened much before we went for a funding round. So I think one thing that we were doing, Rohan, again, maybe I'm jumping all around the place.
No, please.
But, right? Like, so I think one part of how we wanted to do this was we wanted to build it for markets first where it was underserved, right? So all the questions on all the primary research we did, we went around talking to a lot of HR folks. Once we thought this was a good idea.
Some 50 odd people.
Yeah, 50 plus CHROs, because through our consulting networks, banking networks, we had access. That was the most beautiful thing about being in the roles that we were in, or just leaving jobs then. And in these conversations, I think we picked on 2 things which we understood, right? So one, adoption levels were extremely low. Again, if I go back to what I started with, right? HR is that one system used by everybody in the organization. If adoption is great, the system is very, very effective, right? Everybody can do the transaction that they're supposed to do. And then there is data, there's analysis, there's insights and all of that, right? All that thing that you need out of a system. So I think that piece, we clearly understood that nobody was solving for adoption and end user experience when thinking about the system. Everybody was solving it as an administrative system, which is a database, which is analytics, which is reporting, etc., or a control mechanism, rather than saying this is an experience system.
Would I be fair in assuming, because this is true for many enterprise systems, the people buying the system are not incentivized for the experience of using the system, right? A CHRO may buy it because we need to have this, it's a system of record, and without it, how can we function? And the user experience never comes into the picture at all.
Correct. And absolutely right. And I think when we questioned that, when we said, go back and see what's your adoption like of the system, and then suddenly people were like, we are only 40% of my workforce is actually logging in and using attendance on the system, or leave on the system, or performance on the system. And absolutely for the same reason, right? It became a control system, which is, I have to have this in place so that payroll can be run and payslip can be given out. I have done my part of the compliance.
Yeah, typically
so the downside risk is protected. The upside nobody was solving for.
Nobody's incentivized for, right? I'm still trying to understand, in an organization, when you folks started out, I fully get that nobody's optimizing for experience, right? Like you said, adoption might be 40%. But who's incentivized to solve for 80% of adoption? Because in some senses, you gotta pay for the HRMS based on the number of employees they are. Employees will use it for, let's say, leave and salaries and let's say taxes or whatever else. Beyond that, what is the incentive for anyone to solve for it? What did you folks find?
See, I think the HR role includes experience as a key criterion, right? But nobody saw a system to be a solve for it. Everybody looked at system as a control and a database mechanism. They didn't look at system as a solver. Like otherwise, you see, I mean, if you think about rewards and recognition, if you think about employee engagement activities, if you think about ENPSs, that surveys that happen in organizations, those exist. There are enough budgets for those. Nobody looked at HRMS as a system that can solve a significant part of this. The way we looked at it was saying, hey, this is one touch point which exists. How can we elevate this experience? And the elevation of experience is not just about how easily or simply you can do a certain task. It was also about what else can you do on the system, right? I mean, I'm going to my HR person to ask a question. Can I find the answer here itself? Can I get a nudge in the right time to do something, right? Whether that is investment declaration or whether it is filing for expenses by just taking a picture of the receipt copy, etc. And in 2015, all these were cool things that could
in 2026,
happen, right?
we have reached the level where all of that is being done using AI.
Through AI also, right? Like, but I think the part where we saw a huge difference in the markets that we operated in, which is India to start with, was a large part of the employee workforce did not have a laptop. And if you looked at most of the SAP Oracle's workdays, which were born in the West, they started with laptop or the web version as a primary version, only frequently used activities to be mobile. So in our first use case of adoption, the form factor became, hey, we are mobile first for an employee. An employee can do everything, start to finish, from joining the organization to resigning, to doing once a year things like investment declaration, everything on a mobile. Even if they don't have an email ID as a gig workforce, etc., you can just do mobile number plus OTP. So the translation of experience or end user experience for us was mobile first for the end user. The second part of it was a lot of HR culture or HR policies are culturally driven. Like just like you have a finance best practice and a supply chain best practice, it's very difficult to have a HR best practice globally. Because, I mean, a power distance exists in a certain way in India or in Indonesia or in a Middle East versus Europe or in the US. Right? Communication is censored or not based on which country you operate in. So there is no one standard best practice because HR is very culturally driven. So again, we felt that there is no, the West does it this way. So the product translates only what's the West doing, right? What the West is doing. It can't translate completely to India or Indonesia. So we said, how do we make flexibility? How do we bring flexibility into the system so that your policies and processes, and I'll give you another example, right? Absconding is a huge problem in like high field force ecosystems, right? Insurance, pharma reps, etc. If you go and ask any of the Western legacy players saying, hey, absconding is a problem, I need a workflow for it, they'll say, ask them to come and resign. Right? They won't even understand the fact that somebody just won't show up from an employment and go missing. Right? And then when we were able to catch some of these examples and bunch of those examples across countries, we packaged it to say we went to these two, I mean, a lot of these CHROs and said, hey, one, we want to solve for experience, end user experience. Two, we want to solve for configurability, which solves for your context, which means a lot more of the system will be used for your processes. Don't sit outside the system just because your process doesn't match with the best practice, right? Your practice is your practice. So this became the fundamental context in which Darwinbox came into existence.
Do you remember what were your first few killer features, or at least where you put, I mean, the top 3 features that you felt in your first year were key to success and adoption?
I think the whole mobile story definitely worked. And so again, today we are a 26 modules kind of a platform. We were only 3 or 4 modules in our initial days. But what we had to prove was, one, the ease of usage and the configurability in those 3-4 modules before we expand to all 26. Because when we went and sold to our early customers, we always said we want to be an end-to-end HR system because we said, oh, analytics will be better, experience will be better if you are end-to-end. And we had to tell them, hey, right, you've seen 4. We're going to build out everything. But everywhere you'll see the same experience of it being super easy to use for a mobile user. Like, for example, we introduced facial recognition for attendance. for folks who don't have a biometric or people who don't work out of an office, right? Just take a picture of yourself in facial recognition and mark the attendance was one thing, which was very exciting for a lot of field force kind of ecosystem, right? The whole mobile experience in itself was very, very fascinating. Analytics, again, typical consultants, right? Like that part we solved like really well, saying what all do you need to see as data, how much can be real time, etc. So I think a bunch of those definitely worked for us in the early days. Coming back to the earlier question, right? I think the first part of for us belief system was, hey, there is an existing problem in the market, right? While it is a 20-year-old industry, there's definitely an existing problem in the market, because most people we spoke to either said I'm unhappy or कौन hai, right? Like who else is there but SAP, Oracle, Workday, right? And I've taken one of those, so I'm taking the best system, so I'm sorted, right? Or I'm not sorted, but that's the best I could do with what's available in the market.
How did you folks try to estimate the likelihood of people actually willing to try your chance? Because when you do something like this in a market where there are lots of existing players and they're all kind of stable, well-known names with poor usability, but at least the companies are well-known, right? So I'm guessing when you went and spoke to people, you'd hear a lot of people saying, I'm dissatisfied, right? But at the same time, you're a startup. You probably hadn't raised your first, if I'm my research is right, for the first 7 months you folks didn't even raise any money, and even after that you raised an angel round. So you're now saying that people who said I'm dissatisfied with my existing system, even though I know the vendor and the vendor has been with me forever, and that's enough for me to switch to an unknown company built by 3 youngsters. How did you try to figure out that part? Because that's the hardest part. Everyone will tell you what the pains are there in their system, but few people will tell you, if you ask someone, okay, we are going to launch, do you commit to buying my product? I don't think you'd get that kind of a hard commitment.
So I think I'll give you the short and then the long answer. The short answer is somewhere bordering between bravado and naivety, right? I think you need some of that to believe that it will happen. But I think the long answer was, I think first we had to prove to ourselves that, hey, there is a problem that exists, which is consistent, right? We've spoken to 50 plus CHROs and everybody's talking about it. What we envision to build will actually solve that problem. Because I think that part for us was where the bootstrapping came in. Because we didn't want an escalation of commitment to a point where, hey, we have this in our head. We have this in our head, but we don't know whether that will translate to product, because none of us actually built like a SaaS product before, right? Like we've seen products, right? We've experienced products, but none of us has built a SaaS product. So we were like, there's something in our head, something we're very excited about. Every time we speak about it, like we were lighting up and talking to those CHROs, but can we translate that? So I think that was the first step, which is convincing ourselves that a product that comes out, right? First, the screens come out and this thing, and then you take
what that. What is that? Did you folks hire others? Was it just the 3 of you to begin with?
Yeah, so we actually got our first engineer, Vineet, who we've elevated to be co-founder now, right? He's our CTO and co-founder now. So till that point where we started building this, right? We were making wireframes and whatever we could do, right? Basic engineering that we've done, Figmas and wireframes, etc., which is what we were doing. And then once he came on board and he said, hey, this can be translated to a product that can scale, etc., is when the confidence started building. And which is where that 9 months from when we started to when we raised our first round of funding or when we went out to raise, I think every month we could see some part of the product. And that again, we took to some of these CHROs, whoever gave us access for a second or third conversation saying, hey, this is what we're building. Do you like it? Do you like it? Do you like it? And rightly you said, it's all there, but when the rubber hits the road, when the product is out and they're putting their budget, and more than the budget, they're risking their career on it, right?
And I don't think it's so much the money that they're willing to spend on you. It's like, the risk that I'm taking by giving up on something that is not broken. It may be boring, there may be less usability for it, but hey, at least it's not going to get me fired because I took that risk, right? We were talking about risk earlier.
Yeah. And I think there are 2 parts, right? So one part of it is, how do you bring that narrative itself, where a combination of, hey, when you buy an HRMS, adoption or usage or end user experience should be your number one criteria, right? Telling that story of saying, this is your number one criteria, not how reports happen, not how something happened, is one. Second, telling them how much they're missing out because they're not using a great product, right? So I think that piece was,
So it's getting them to believe as well.
it's getting them to believe, and then managing the perception of risk, right? And I think we would have delayed our fundraising a little more if we didn't have to manage that perception of risk. So for us, funding was another way to manage the perception of risk, validation, because when we got somebody like Mohandas Pai Invest in our first round, we could at least go back and say, hey, this guy was the CFO, CHRO of Infosys. He's put in his money behind this. We are not going to shut down in the next 1 year. And that's the question we used to get, right? Like the most common question is, what if you shut down? What happens to my employee data? Right? So, and that, to manage that perception, again, fundraising was very, very important very quickly. We thought actually we'll get a few 100K of ARR and then get to fundraising, we'll get a much better valuation. All of that was what we thought about once we went into the market. And interestingly enough, right, if I play back 2015, everybody was only funding SME US. We were on the other extreme if it is a 2x2 of Asia enterprise, right? And we didn't realize that. And that came out again a little more starkly when we started to fundraise. But till that point, at least we were clear that there is a problem. We have a narrative that stands, and we just have to convince them to take that first bite, because we were very confident about what the product that has been built, right? So that's where I think that is the long answer to the question of saying, hey, we were very clear that there is a problem. We were very excited about what we had built to solve for it. Fundraising, scaling, etc. was a combination of bravado plus naivety, because that needed that selling and customers to buy it.
To just close this conversation, there is a very famous saying which exists, right? Nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM.
Yes.
Of course, it's another matter that IBM is not so culturally relevant, but it's really that when it comes to enterprise software, people always want to focus on safety and picking the vendor that is well known and in the Gartner Magic Quadrant in the right, respectability, like you rightly said, right? But to go back to the question that I also asked earlier, what happened when you went to your first fundraise and they asked, who's the CEO? Yeah. What do you tell them?
So I think, I was I was doing the first bunch of fundraising, right? And when they asked me the question, I asked back saying, why does it matter, right? And then they said, I want somebody who can make the decision. I said, decision making will be three of us in some of this. And that comes back to your earlier question, right? The 1 year that we were building this, I think three of us, while we come from very similar backgrounds, we have our own personalities, which obviously has evolved over time and also, right, become starker to notice, right? All three of us have very different set of strengths that we bring into the mix, right? Jayant is the eternal optimist, the banker who will jump and say, right, why can't this be a Workday alternative, etc. from get-go, right? So very naturally, he was the seller, right? He sold the product better, this thing. These were not major choices that we made. Chaitanya was definitely the scientist among the three of us, right? Goes to the last level of detail, etc. Understood HR already. So he was the product guy. And I was doing everything in between, right? I was more maybe the middle
You came from McKinsey.
Right? It was more I think more than McKinsey, I think the strength I brought in was more like a balance. I was a very realist in terms of practicality. What's the next step? Let's move forward. Let's, right, bring something into action kind of a thing, versus there is a very optimistic
balance
view of the world.
The sales, view of the world
and the scientific view of the world, which is only when the best product happens, it should come out.
Perfection.
Right? Somewhere play that balance. And I think when these roles formalized and over time, right, as we sold, etc., and all of us played all three roles, right, in one way or the other, but we had a primary role. One thing we did very early, Rohan, and which is very uncharacteristic of maybe early stage bravado founders or the jumping in, we said, we should have some principles of operating, right? We pulled up, we worked out of a penthouse, which is basically Jayant's in-laws penthouse, which was empty. I think it is not allowed to have a penthouse, so it was empty, right, in that building. So we were operating out of there. 3 plastic chairs were sitting and saying, okay, what are the few things that we agree on today, and things might change in the future, etc. So a few things that we agreed on in terms of, okay, we'll build for the customer first, we'll build like this first, we'll build HR first, all of that. The other thing that we agreed on was, right, decision making, and which is interesting because we started with that part. At least we said, hey, we should not become a committee which will slow down decision making, because the downside of not having one CEO
Of three people being
of three people
equals, is that it
equals
becomes
is
a race round condition.
right. So what we said is, hey, right, most times we'll have consensus because we should be talking a lot. So I think that for us is very DNA. We talk a lot as three of us, right? Most times we'll be talking a lot, but when it comes to a deadlock, this person will take decision on sales, right? Like what was this thing, right? Jayant was taking decision on sales. Chaitanya will take decision on roadmap. Rohit will take decision on people, right? So it became that in a sense where our finances and people at that point of time, right? Where, right, if there is a deadlock, let's have a veto kind of a thing. And this is exactly what I explained back to the investor when they asked for this, right? Like, and then they said, no, it's better to have a CEO. We went back and discussed it. We didn't find a very compelling reason other than, oh, it's done in the market kind of a thing. Because through the year, we never experienced any delayed decision making, right? And that's the same thing. That's something we went back and said, when you think we are getting delayed in decision making, please come and tell us. We'll find a CEO among ourselves. And that's something we agreed among the three of us, right? And that's the same answer we gave in every fundraising round, saying, if you feel at any point of time, we are happy to reflect. We have a way to make this happen, right? We know, for example, when we go public, at some point of time in the future, we'll need a CEO. We'll make somebody, right? We have a way of thinking about it, how we want to do it, etc. We'll do it then, right? But I mean, if there is no problem and this is working, why do you want to change it? Is where we started with, right? And it has worked well for us. I think the advantage that happens, Rohan, is, and which is less talked about, is if the founder or the CEO is a sales founder, there is over-indexing on sales. And the CEO is a product founder, there is over-indexing on product.
The nature of the organization
it changes the nature of the organization. And I've seen this play out very, very distinctly in different companies where, over-promising and the product is trying to catch up because there is a inherent unsaid,
or it's product perfection
but not selling, right? So maybe there was a nice, right, and in hindsight you can talk about all of this in glory, but I think there was a nice continuum where different points of time different things became important and not one person's agenda. It is not an agenda, but it's just their personal strength becoming priority.
All right, let's take a step back to Darwinbox itself. We never got around to talking much about it. How would you describe Darwinbox? What is Darwinbox?
See, Darwinbox is a new age enterprise HR technology platform.
Oh, that's a mouthful. Yeah. Simpler version. What's a simpler version for a lay person?
So it's all your HR needs automated for an enterprise, right? Complete end-to-end, everything that an HR does, we enable it through technology.
Interesting. Give us a sense of, you've raised how much venture capital?
So I think primary venture capital is around the 135 million mark, and secondary would be around that much.
Got it.
Right. So
how many people are you today?
We are about 1,100 people.
Give us a sense of what's your revenue or scale like, whatever numbers you can
share. So we are at the 100 million ARR mark scale in terms of ARR.
And if I'm not mistaken, you became a unicorn. I know these things are just made up constructs, but in your last round, if I'm not mistaken,
last
right?
Round.
Your
last so the last one happened 3-4 months back, which is predominantly secondary.
Got it. That was 140 million.
Yeah, that was predominantly secondary, very little primary.
Got it.
And the round before that is when the status happened.
Did anything change? I know you're probably going to say, no, nothing. We're the still same folks. But when Darwinbox became a unicorn, did you notice anything changing inside the organization? Not among founders, but among the rest of your colleagues?
I think a lot of people, and it happened to us also, a lot of people started becoming curious about what we did. People outside started becoming curious about what we did. And B2B is generally unsexy, right? In most situations, B2B is unsexy. I had relatives, I had family, I had friends who just were appalled by the fact that I ran a loss-making company for a very long time. And thanks to, right, like the whole Startup India or Modi ji talking about unicorns, suddenly when we became unicorn, a lot more interest in the company came from quarters which was not there before, right? And that definitely changed.
It's very interesting. This is the first time I'm hearing this sort of an explanation that unicorn word is a container for people to understand the startup world or make sense of it, and therefore when a company moves into that container, suddenly they see it differently. I'd always seen that in the sense of, oh, it's validation because it's $1 billion, it shows that the company isn't. I'd never seen it described as, for the average person, a unicorn is a narrative
Yeah.
method or a container to see, oh,
It was
this
a
is a
container
success.
to see that they've arrived. Right, or they're of scale, right? Otherwise, for a natural, like, I mean, my dad for the first 4 years was very worried about, right, oh, loss making hai, profitable kab banega, like that was the more the conversation, etc. Versus, oh, you're raising more money, you're giving away stake, right? Like, I mean, those were the kind of conversations. Unicorn suddenly validated that for external world. I mean, for us, I think the it gave us a little bit of aggression because of the amount of money. So I think it was not the unicorn status, but we've never raised till that point above like a 15-20 million round. And that was like a 90 million kind of a round.
What did that make you feel, that additional capital?
It made us more aggressive, right? Like we said, oh, maybe we can launch 3 markets together. Maybe we can launch 3 products together, right?
And what happened after that?
I think I think we still did that, but I think we were distracted a little bit by the spreading thin. A few things, right? Like for example, we grew very quickly, but for example, the support pieces broke because I mean there was exuberance around selling, etc., and rightly so, right? Like it was. I mean, it's a product. It's not service that you can scale it. You have to. You just need sales folks to scale it as long as it's working as a product. But the support team and their training and their capability took time to take off, which affected support for about a 6 months time, because you just need a ramp up time, because you can't just throw people at problem,
I
right?
get
Like
it. Both can't operate scale at the same. The
yeah,
sales will always be the lead indicator,
correct,
and support will
correct,
always have to
and
catch
sales
up.
worked, right? And I think at that point of time, as a combination, we hired more sales folks. Everybody was delivering. I mean, it was also just COVID time and post COVID where digitization happened in a very, very big way. People were open to technology, etc. And then support had to catch up, and those things broke. Right, and to recover from that, it took us a long time, because obviously support is bad press, bad feedback from the market, and then we had to do a bunch of things to make sure that this thing. So I think other than that, right, everything else remained the same, right? In terms of, I think the DNA of the founders translates for us, right? Our founders are the early team, right? We still continue to be very efficient in terms of selling, very efficient in terms of support, very efficient in terms of when we launch a new country, we are very, very calculated about this is the investment, these are the milestones that we need to go to, rather than say whatever it takes and all of that.
Got it. How does Darwinbox make money?
See, I think if you think about any SaaS product, and Darwinbox is no different, I think the replicability of a product allows it to have very, very good gross margins. Which is,
what does that mean?
So basically, if a person, so the revenue for Darwinbox is per employee, per month, per module. That's the simple math in which Darwinbox's revenue works. If you have 1,000 employees, if you're using 4 modules, you pay us X, and as 1,000 grows up, you pay us that 1,100 into X or 1,200 into X. As the modules increase, it will be 1,100 into X plus Y, right? So I think that's the revenue model. Now there is a cost which comes at a gross margin level, which are 2 costs, right? One is the hosting and compute costs, that is there as the technology cost, and then there is the support cost. All right. As long as the technology cost generally scales, right, there is some operating advantage you get because of volume, etc. But that scales as the number of employees go up or number of modules go up. Support sometimes, as and when how well you build the product and how well you build the support engine, the cost can come down up. So then there is the whole gross margin engine. Below that is your gross margin, that typically a SaaS company operates between 60% to 80% gross margin, right? And we also operate in that range only. And below that is your selling cost, and is your R&D cost, and your general cost. So those are the 3 cost items that are there. The selling costs are high in a SaaS business because you sell upfront, you earn later. So the cost of selling is always front loaded, right? You use whatever, right? Sales teams, marketing, branding, all of that to make sure, and each sale process takes 6 to 9 months to get a customer. So the selling cost is upfront. The R&D cost is more in terms of future looking, right? So, I mean, you can always say there is only one product. Why is there R&D cost? For example, when AI was launched, we put significant amount of money into R&D because we are like, this is the future, right? While I know it'll cost us in the near term, but in the future term, it'll help us get better revenues. And then there is the administrative cost that is there. So below that is whatever you make out of it.
Got it. Interesting. Let me switch back to you now. You grew up in Hyderabad. What's your family history? How did you, after your engineering, you went to VIT. After that, if I'm not mistaken, you went to Google and worked there for a few years. Then you went to IIM Lucknow for your MBA, and then you joined McKinsey. And then we'll come to this earlier, but what was your family like?
Yeah. So, see, I'm a single kid. So, to go a little bit back into history, my grandparents migrated from the village to the city. And this was in between the Naxal movement, etc., where villages became a little untenable and then they moved into the city. So, given their background, they had very little understanding of the city. And I always say the adaptability story of my grandparents is an inspiration in itself, because you come into a new city, you've always been in a village for generations, and then you're dealing with Hyderabad kind of a city, and all sizes, all cities. And then my dad was this first generation of, I have to study to a certain level to get a job and then do it. So very middle class that way, right? But thankfully, maybe because of the ecosystem, education was a big priority in our families. Right? Whether you do well or not, you need to do like graduation, post-graduation, etc. A lot of my childhood was defined by tennis, actually, right? For me, there are only two things, right? One is go to school and then go to tennis, right? It was almost like two ways I lived my life. Tennis was a bigger passion than...
So what did your dad do?
So he worked as a engineer.
So he was in a salaried job.
He was in a salaried
not
job.
Entrepreneur.
Yeah. So he did some bit of it towards the end of his career around doing some trading, etc. But mostly a salaried job. My mother was a homemaker. I was a single child. All right. I went to schooling in Hyderabad itself. And I think, as I said, the definition for me of my childhood was more tennis in my head and less studies, etc. And tennis I was very, very serious about at that point of time, at least. And then towards the 10th standard is when people asked me a question around saying, hey, career, right? How are you thinking about life? And you need to make money also, etc. It was very difficult to give up tennis. But some way my grades, etc. meant that I had a better chance of a more economically successful life with my education, etc. Then obviously the usual do the IIT coaching, and that's where I met Jayant at that point of time, right? Like I'm doing the IIT coachings and all of that. Then ended up going to VIT, did my engineering there. I was a mechanical engineer, was placed in GE, came to Hyderabad. Then I went to meet a friend at Google, and I was fascinated. They have this huge screen at the entrance of Google, which keeps throwing up all the search queries across the world continuously. It felt extremely powerful, right? Like, and that time Google was a fascinating company. So then I figured out, are there roles for a mechanical engineer, etc. And there was a search analyst role, which is mostly a little bit of coding plus a lot of math. So I applied for it, got through it. And so 3 years of Google, really enjoyed, spent about close to 9 months in Ireland, my first international trip, etc. So got exposed to a lot of cultures, a lot of...
Why didn't you stick on at Google instead of deciding to go for your MBA? What made you want to do an MBA?
So I had this random habit of writing CAT every year in November, right? Like it was like an annual tradition, right? I went and wrote it 3 times. Third time I got through, right? It was not like a very planned thing. And everybody in Google, including the HRBPs, etc., said, if you're getting into an IIM or an ISB, etc., why don't you just take it up? It'll open up a few things. The other thing that I was very, very excited about is marketing as a function. I was very, very fascinated by marketing as a function because in my head, it was a lot more creative, branding, etc. So ended up going to MBA in IIM Lucknow, went to PNG for my internship in marketing for my summers in Singapore. Finished with that 2 months and then realized I got an PPO, and then I realized saying, it's
a pre-placement offer.
It's a job offer. It's a job offer. And then I realized marketing, you're not allowed to really control like these narratives, etc., right? And these are brands which have been built over tens and hundreds of years. You can't change that. And then I got fascinated by this whole consulting thing. A lot of my seniors who I looked up to were going into consulting. And then I liked the idea that, hey, there's problem solving, there's different project every few months, different people you work with, etc. And that's something I naturally enjoy even to date. Right, problem solving for me is something that
So
I
you're a
really.
generalist, like, you know, I
I'm,
mean,
I'm
you,
a hardcore generalist in that sense, where I love new problems, new set of people to work with. All the new launches of countries in Darwinbox, I do. New narratives for products, I think about, right? Like those are things that I enjoy doing myself. So in terms of McKinsey was fascinating in itself as an experience, because I think the range of experiences or range of projects and problems that you deal with really solid, great colleagues is something really, really exciting. And till like this whole holidays in Hyderabad happened, I had my career planned out in McKinsey. So I wouldn't have thought about myself as an entrepreneur. I had the good fortune of consulting for some startups, largest scale e-commerce startups in India at that point of time, and got to experience the thrill and rush of it. But still, I saw my career continuing in McKinsey till Jayant one fine day started throwing ideas at me. I started throwing ideas at him, and we ended up building Darwinbox.
very interesting. Um, there is this question that I always ask founders, that we're typically the average. I mean, there is a saying that we're the average of the 5 people that we spend the most amount of time with. Who are they for you? I'm assuming 2 of them are your co-founders.
I think my co-founders, my wife, and 2 other friends from school probably will be this thing, who have no connection to anything to do with tech or startups. So I think those are my 5. That's the average. The 5 chimpanzees are.
Interesting. You operate in the people management space. So I want to now switch a little bit and talk about the function of people management. In fact, it wasn't even called people management. There's enough and more literature that talks about how, you know, I mean, this entire concept of HR started from factories where, like, you know, I mean, human resources, the word itself comes from viewing humans as a resource. And like, how have you seen, I mean, what is your narrative? I'm sure you've had this conversation probably 1,000 times in your meetings and sales conversation, etc. The evolution of the HR function or the people function. How is it? How would you explain how that function has evolved and where is it today?
See, like rightly said, right? Even if you take like one of the best B schools for HR in India, right, XLRI, the course is called IR, Industrial Relations. Right?
Because that's where the roots lie.
The roots is about
and,
factory negotiations and all of that. I think the evolution came from a fact that
I mean, literally, it's called Xavier Labor Relations
Institute, right? And it's the most popular course, and it's still called PMIR. So they added people management.
Yes, BMD was the other course, right?
Right. So PMIR, because people management and industrial relations. So I think the part where I break it down for myself in terms of HR is right. The 3 primary responsibilities in my head for any organization, leave HR, right? Which is attract the right set of people, right? Enable them and give them the right incentives. And forget HR, right? Like just any organization to be successful.
I get first one and third one. Attract the right set of people loosely translates to find and hire the best people. Correct. Incentivize them usually turns out to salaries, ESOP, total rewards, incentive structures, whatever, right? What's the one in the middle? So enable them. What does that mean?
Enable them means, for example, tell them what they need to do, give them the right tools to do it, right? And help them measure it. And if I take this out, abstract it out, right? Nothing of this is HR, right? Any organization, if you think about it, which has people, should be doing this. Interestingly enough, all 3 fall under the sub buckets of HR. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, the power of HR in an organization is very, very highly driven by the CHRO actually. How well the CHRO understands business and works with the rest of the business actually translates to how the function operates.
Very famous HBR article about HR having a seat at
the table, right? Like, and you go to any HR conference, they'll be talking about seat at the table.
They were talking about it 20 years ago. They
continue to about it, right? Like, and whether it's AI in HR or crypto in HR, you talk about seat at table, right? But I think the fundamental question that if you think about, business leaders are also thinking about these three things only. How well you translate between how each of these is impacting their business metrics and enable that is the function of HR, right? Whether it is, right, when you think about sales, right? If you don't hire salespeople on time and give them the right tools, sales don't happen, right? It's just a lead indicator for your sales, right? Whether it's support, right? If you don't enable them enough and give them the right information that they need to pass on to a customer, right, support fails. If you don't incentivize them correctly, right? You can talk about it in all technical terms in terms of compa ratios, market parity and all of that. If you don't incentivize them, you lose people. You're losing organizational context and learning to people that you're leaving, right? So if you package it, all of this comes under an HR function. But there is enough debate, Rohan, on is the manager the new HR, for example, right? Like, see, I'm saying
I would have asked you that question because one of the things that's also been happening, I mean, since you mentioned startups like, Silicon Valley, start tech startups, etc., is that there has been this, especially in younger, smaller startups, etc., to sort of not have an HR function at all. There is no HR manager. Everyone does what they're expected to, or they collaborate in teams, or maybe they'll have a manager, but that manager is not an HR manager. They're just their line managers, etc., and all that. Where did that, how do you see that, this thing of we don't need to have an HR function, we don't need to have an HR manager?
See, I think the whole HR function operates in a spectrum. On one end, Rohan, there are specialized functions in HR, right? Broadly broken, it is HR operations and HR business partnering. In HR operations, you can have recruitment, you can have time attendance management, you can have payroll processing, payout, etc. And HR business partnering includes career planning, succession planning, right? Workforce planning, all of those planning pieces and performance pieces and all of that. On the other end of the spectrum is like a pod structure, which is there is a person who is helping you with the people side of the story. Now, you want to call that person HR, you want to call that person the manager of these people, it could be anything. Today, across organizations, we are somewhere in this spectrum, right? Where there are organizations which say, hey, right, as long as we are enabling a bunch of these people, right, with all the data that is needed, all the things, right? Because if you have to hire someone, knowing what kind of person to hire, etc., if the manager has time to do that and they are able to do it, more kudos to them, right? And structured, they can happen. But is there some specialization in understanding, translating it to the world in terms of a job description, in terms of the tools where, right, or portals where you get those information from, or going and scouting in the market, etc.? That could be a strength, right? And that brings you a little bit to the functional aspect of it, right? Similarly, when you think about performance reviews processes, understanding various contexts in which where a goal-based system, which is, oh, this is this KRA, you get this number, you get this rating, you paid blindly, versus, oh, there is a competency-based thing, which is you exhibit a bunch of competencies to a certain proficiency level and you're paid so much. Again, has a wide spectrum, right? Like, again,
it's always this balance of objectivity and subjectivity.
Objectivity and subjectivity, right? And the whole point about choice of objectivity, subjectivity also comes from whether you need enough experience doing this. If I want to do it from first principles, it's just about enablement that you need through data, etc. There are a few aspects of HR which are a lot more compliance-led, Rohan, which is almost like having a finance or a legal team, which is like paying correct salaries, right? There are a lot of compliances around labor compliances, etc., which you need to take care of, which are very, very, or provident funds or POSH, etc., for which you need people for sure, right? Those are things that are almost like saying these are guardrails for you to operate a company. Those you need for. On top of that, the business partnering piece, whether that is an individual within the team doing it or whether it's an HR person, can always be constructed in whatever way and fashion.
If you've been a long-time listener to this podcast and are glad we're back, do tell the world by sharing this episode with everyone you think will find it valuable. Produced by Udantika Kashyap and mixed and mastered by the wonderful Rajiv CN, our resident sound engineer. This is me, Rohin Dharmakumar, signing off. We'll be back soon with another episode.